Welcome to Mr. Tiger Drop Films, your source for all things Yakuza, Like a Dragon, analysis, and way more pop culture. But today, turns out recently we got a new trailer. I think it's the third trailer for Stranger Than Heaven, a game from RGG and Sega that used to be known as Project Century. And now with the trailer revealing that it takes place across about 5 or so decades, from the 1910s to the early 1960s, the good old Showa era of Japan. If you're a Godzilla or Ultraman fan, you know all about the Showa era. But Project Century seems to be really living up to its name in terms of at least being a story about a character, a narrative that seems to transcend and conspire over a few decades of storytelling. We're probably going to see the whole life of this guy named, I believe his name is Mako Daito. Of course, the first name being Mako, he very well could reveal his name as Makoto, and then he's probably going to create the damn Tojo if he turns out to be the Tojo clan founder, who in Yakuza 6, The Song of Life, there's a little quick Easter egg of sorts of lore. It's like the only game to do lore in the series, Yakuza 6, but a piece of lore that says that it was founded by Makoto Tojo long ago, and he's a man shrouded in mystery. So I think the big theory, it's probably going to be right, that this game is in some way about him. If not a side character, then we'll have to see. But as it stands, yep, this is part of the Yakuza verse, the Like a Dragon universe, with Sotenbor and Kamurocho already confirmed to be in the game. And with all that in mind, here are my thoughts on why this game, Stranger Than Heaven, is Yakuza's future. First up, the narrative. I think the big thing that's going to make this game a real banger is the fact that if you look at RGG's previous catalog, every time they introduce a brand new playable protagonist, the game usually is really great. Of course, I'm a guy that adores all of Kiryu's sequels and even the sequels to other new characters, but I just, looking back on the narratives of ones that are super emotional, more often than not always, but more often than not, it seems to be these introductions of new characters, right? A bit of a clean slate, if you will. Like, look at their catalog, right? You have Ishin of Ryoma being the main character. I know he was the Kiryu character pretty much, but again, historical figure. But they made an interesting plot about Ryoma and Ishin. The First Judgment of Yagami. The Kaito Files of Kaito being a nice little breath of fresh air by reintroducing Kaito in a new light. And of course, Yagami in the First Judgment had a really great story that he had to overcome with his arc and fighting the truth of the past and proving that he was always a great detective and lawyer, the whole time. And then you have games like Yakuza 4, which really started it all, if you don't count Kinzen. But Yakuza 4, right? Akiyama, a new guy in the world that's already established, with Akiyama having such a great center story to start Yakuza 4 off, that I think that he really is the core pillar of that story and why I always enjoyed Yakuza 4. So we got Akiyama, and then if you flash forward a little bit later, we got Ichiban and Yakuza 7, a really strong new story that get people into the franchise, and it's such a good starting off point even there at 7 that I really adored Ichiban's journey, and again, bringing us into a world that we probably know some things about. Same here with Stranger Than Heaven, a game that, of course, Criminal Underworld is in Japan, we have done that before, but taking place over time periods, a whole character's life will be new. Not new for the game industry, but new for RGG storytelling. And then we have Majima Yakuza 0. And while 0 was not Majima's first playable game, they wrote him in a way for being an origin story that it felt brand new and fresh, and is obviously why a lot of people got into the franchise internationally. And even a game that I played recently, like Fists of North Star Lost Paradise of Kenshiro, that game, the way RGG handled the structure, made me really fall in love with that franchise, and now I'm a Fist of North Star fan because of how they introduced me to Kenshiro in that game, blending both Yakuza and the stories of the manga. So, bit of a tangent, with all that in mind, I do think that what is going to make Stranger Than Heaven a real banger, and that I'm sure will be the case, is because it's a new starting off point. More than a fresh coat of paint, with some familiar territory, but it ups the violence, the darkness, but I'm sure it will have some lighthearted moments. But all in all, I feel like Stranger Than Heaven is going to be a great way of showing the future of the franchise, while making a story very much so set in the past, even before the events of the main Yakuza series. Branching off of that, we got Kamurocho something more, and I would assume maybe Hokkaido and two new cities. But what does that mean for the gameplay? Like I said, this is a first for RGD and for Yokoyama himself. From my understanding, he is the executive director, not just the writer. So I'm sure this is a real passion project for Yokoyama. Like, who knows? Maybe all the bad press he's been getting with fans and articles and tabloids has been on purpose up the ante for Stranger Than Heaven. Can you imagine that? Yokoyama's written so many Yakuza games that he had to make a conspiracy plot himself just to make this game real banger. I'm kidding, but can you imagine? That'd be really goddamn funny. Nonetheless, it seems like Yokoyama's passion project more than some past games, I'd even say. And even as a guy that really enjoyed both Power Yakuza and Infinite Wealth, two games that I do think will age better with time. I think that Strange in the Heaven, if it's really gonna up the ante on a beat 'em up combat, but maybe being a bit more about grappling and more violence, like going after particular limbs of an enemy, and a lot of environmental, what I would assume, collateral damage. Maybe taking even more inspiration from some martial art film classics. But I do think that narrative-wise, it's gonna be really interesting, following what I would assume is the whole journey of Mako Daito's story. Him and his blue glowing eyes. I can't remember what that is in the new trailer, but clearly there's going to be something more surreal, something more indicative of a time that, as the further we get into the future, even something like the 60s and before, it becomes sort of a fantasy land. And that kind of fantasy land, that surrealness, I think could lend itself to a great aesthetic and atmosphere for Stranger Than Heaven, with, of course, the elephant in the room being that it takes place both before and after World War II. So that will be interesting. Seeing where they go narratively and with the enemies in the game and the whole story, the conflict, and what it means for the criminal underworld being really established post samurai era, post World War One, and into pre World War Two, and all the dark things that the Japanese government did at the time. It'll be interesting to see if there was some kind of push and pull between the rise of the Imperial Army and some of the established characters at this time in the Japanese underworld, right? Because if you look at kind of the archetypes of like any time period, samurais, westerns, any knights, any time in warfare, like history, right? Usually there's good versions of people and there's bad versions of people. And when it comes to characters like Majima, Ichiban, and Majima, the present day Yakuza series, they were kind of emblematic of that trope archetype, for lack of a better term, of these noble guys and pretty dark professions, being legends. But the legends are supposed to portray like kind of figure in their communities in the underworld around the time period of like, say, the 50s and 60s that Stranger Than Heaven takes place in. We're going to see how those legends establish. At least that's my hope, and I feel like that might be some kind of, intended consequence of this game's story. Again, people want to see a lot of established characters appear. By that, I mean, I can see Kamaki appearing, or even like prototype or predecessors to characters like we saw in the Ishin game. But I think, are we going to see a young Kazama here with a different voice actor? Maybe. Are we going to see the three lieutenants from Yakuza 0? I know what, I would count on seeing them as younger guys, because the fact that they brought back those three recently for a trailer for Yakuza 0 Director's Cut, and even they brought them back for Ishin Kawami, and then recently Shibusawa's actor came back for the new like Yakuza X Neon Toitsu live action, miniseries. In that one, Shibusawa's actor plays Terada. And of course, they made Shibusawa the main bad guy of Ishin Kawami. But again, I could imagine some of these characters, at least in Yakuza 0, if they were already old by the time in the 1980s, then maybe they could appear at the very last part of Stranger Than Heaven, assuming it does end in the early 1960s. Again, things like that I could live with. Something like showing Kiryu's father and mother, his birth parents, nope, I don't want to see that. Not at all. And yes, there's probably a few other bits of character lore I'm, glossing over in terms of who we could see. Like, could we see Shimano and the any other big group in the game? Probably. Are we going to see some Dojima ancestor? Maybe. A lot of it's up in the air. Is the Daidoji going to appear? I hope not. But if there's one game that would do it, it would probably be this one, and I'd be okay with it in some ways. But all that in mind, right? I think the narrative and the gameplay will be interesting, a much more violent and rigid gameplay. Like I said earlier, an emphasis on environmental fighting, using it, fighting some pretty big guys, and really diffusing enemies and taking them down in a violent but beautiful manner. Yeah, like using a knife to hit pressure points or ACL on an enemy or cutting tendons, or that's what it looks like, grappling and shoving people on the ground. The enemies seem to be more responsive and reactive in a way that we haven't seen in a Like a Dragon game, and who knows how long, because even the recent Dragon Engine ones I felt more beat 'em up video gamey than ever before. And again, I love the arcadiness, while I prefer some of the more beat 'em up feeling of the past, like PS3, PS4 era of games. I can see why in this game, they seem to be moving away from the more explosive heat actions of fiery heat auras being everywhere and just taking over the screen, and just, more overtly stylized manga video gamey action. And here in Stranger Than Heaven seems just to be very just to the point and brutal, and having some really great looking animations that I'm excited to explore. Bottom line, I do wonder what the premium adventure is going to be like in this game. Does that mean we're going to be able to just, since it's premium adventure, select a time period of its particular city to go back in so we can just explore willy-nilly? Maybe that'd be a cool feature. I do hope that this game is gorgeous and as expansive, and as a big Yakuza 5 fan, it's cool having 5 cities again. Good gosh, this might be the first game to truly rival Yakuza 5 in terms of scale. But I do hope that the game isn't too bogged down by its narrative, that's just only objectives of some side content. I hope they really get to explore the world in their own way, and having some interesting mini games to do. We saw a little bit of, your standard fare, like eating at restaurants in this latest trailer that came out a couple hours ago. That's cool. I'm glad that they are going to take into account the immersive sort of virtual tourism that I come to expect from the Like a Dragon series, even all the way back for the PS2 era. With all that in mind, I do hope that there is something else besides just this big revamp of a violent story and expansive open world. By that, I mean, I really hope that the open world has something really interesting to have beyond being a really cool excuse for a timepiece and setting. With all that in mind, am I optimistic about Stranger Than Heaven? Well, does the curry man like to gas it up? The answer is yes, I am excited about this one. Is it gonna make me feel like a goddamn badass? I think so. But even without that, do I think this could be a compelling, at least one-off story? With taking the references to the other Yakuza games aside, will this be worthy of being its own thing, like the original Judgment and the other one-off games in the series? I think so. I think this could be a nice, fresh start for the Yakuza series, while also showing that RGG still has tricks up their sleeves, including Yokoyama himself, in terms of bringing us a new, immersive crime drama thrilling experience with some surrealness to it that I think will heighten its reality and make it a memorable, emotional, and badass experience. With all that in mind, let me know in the comments what your hype is for the game, guys. Let me know your thoughts. What do you expect? What are your fears, concerns, and do you think it will be a good bounce back for the Yakuza games? Or do you think the internet hype's just going to make everybody think, oh, we're so back again after Kiwami 3 and other, not so great news? Up to you. Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think this will make a case for Yakuza still having a place in video game pop culture, or will this be potentially a big blunder? Above all, I think Stranger Than Heaven will be some kind of bloated mess, but one that I might admire and at least appreciate the scope it's trying to go for and the story it's going to tell. But again, it's all pretty much still kept under wraps what the true details of the game are, but I'm looking forward to it. I've been Mr. Tiger Drop Films, and I'll see you in the next one, because stay tuned, I got some more videos cooking. Until then, keep Tiger dropping, and moi.